Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
MPs wearing stab vests to visit constituents. Is this really where our democracy has sunk to? Today we talk to two members of Parliament about their own safety. That and the enormous speech that the Prime Minister is making, perhaps to secure his legacy. What's this all about, and is maths really the solution to the country's problems? We'll be exploring all of this on top of crime in London after the news.
Hello, good morning. It's 9:31. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is to announce plans for all pupils in England to study some form of maths until the age of 18. In his first speech of the year, Rishi Sunak will lay out his priorities for the year ahead, including reimagining our approach to numeracy. He'll argue letting children into the workplace without maths skills is letting them down, as children's future jobs will require more analytical skills. School teacher and maths ambassador Bobby Seagull says there is a significant need for increased focus on maths.
One of the headline stats that the Prime Minister talked about was that there were 8 million adults in England, that's 1 in 2, that had the numeracy skills that we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. And that's where I think is the key failing. You might have passed an exam at 16, but 10, 12 years down the line, when you get your mortgage bill or you get like a bank statement, do you understand what's going on? So I think it's translating the math skills on paper to real life numeracy application.
Around half of Britain's railway lines are closed, with only a fifth of services running as 40,000 rail workers strike again today. RMT members across Network Rail and 14 train companies are on day 2 of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over paid jobs and conditions. Train drivers in the ASLEF union will strike on Thursday, followed by a second 48-hour RMT strike on Friday. Food inflation hit a record 13.3% last month due to soaring prices. That's up from 12.4% in the previous month. It comes as the latest price index showed the overall shop price inflation eased slightly to 7.3% in December. A leading doctor has warned toothbrushes are becoming a luxury item as soaring costs are forcing families to buy food over a toothbrush and toothpaste. In an interview with the British Medical Journal, Dr. Camilla Kingdon said the state of children's teeth is alarming evidence of how the cost of living crisis is impacting children's health. She described the situation as a national disgrace. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Tom Harwood.
Good morning, it's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Well, now, before we get to the Prime Minister's big speech this morning, some members of Parliament have started to implement additional security measures as they fear for their own personal safety while carrying out their duties as elected representatives. In 2010, the Labour MP Stephen Timms survived an attempt on his life during a constituency surgery in London. In 2016, Jo Cox was fatally shot and stabbed as she made her way to a surgery in West Yorkshire. And most recently, of course, Sir David Amess was stabbed to death as he met constituents at a surgery in Southend. Now, speaking to our own Gloria De Piero in an interview that airs exclusively on GB News this Sunday, Virginia Crosby MP reveals she wears a stab vest now to protect herself. Here's what she had.
I have surgeries. I do face-to-face surgeries where I wear a stab jacket, obviously following the murder of David Amess, and also I have security protection as well. And I think it's important that I have direct contact with my constituents. And unfortunately, this is one of the things that I have to do to ensure that I can actually do the job that I was elected to do.
Well, I'm delighted to say that we're joined now live by Virginia from College Green, just outside Parliament. And thank you so much for making the time for us this morning. I suppose the first question is, how long have you decided that you've needed to wear a stab vest, that this has been a necessary protection for you?
Well, good morning, Tom, from College Green in Westminster. For me, it really was the dreadful stabbing of Sir David Amess back in October 2021. And I went back to my office, I sat down with my team, and I'm absolutely determined to keep meeting my constituents. I have a reputation for working very hard and for being very approachable, and I would agree with that. And that means actually having face-to-face surgery. So we sat down to come up with a plan to enable me to meet my constituents on a regular basis, but also to do that in a safe manner. And that means wearing a stab jacket. I have private security. The police are aware of where I have surgeries, and also my team are fully trained and fully aware. But it's something that I don't want to have to do, but it's something that I do because I'm determined to be the best MP I can be for Ynys Môn, and that means meeting and supporting my constituents on a regular basis.
We've heard reports in the last few years of panic buttons being installed in various MPs' homes, of course, stab vests and the like. How widespread are the security measures that MPs such as yourself are now taking?
Well, I don't think it would be prudent to talk in detail about MPs' security measures. I'm sure you and your listeners will understand. But the reality is most MPs are concerned about their safety. You mentioned the terrible death of Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. What other job do you do where people are killed on a regular basis for trying to do the job that they were democratically elected to do? But I think it's really important that we highlight this is a tiny minority of people. On Honest Morn, I go around, I go to my local pub, the Vic, to watch the World Cup. I go to Asda, I go to Aldi, and most people are respectful of democracy. They're very, very polite, and I'm very, very well looked after on the island. This is a tiny, tiny minority.
So what perhaps needs to change about how we interact with politics in society, about how society runs itself, about how we approach politics as a thing, really? Is this now just an inevitability that we're going to have these sort of precautions in place, or is there something that can be done to make things better for how people interact with politics?
Well, I think the real issue is social media and the fact that so many people can post on social media with impunity. I really believe in people having a voice and in democracy, but on social media, people have said they want to bomb me, to cause me harm, to poison me with ricin. And I have this unholy trinity, I would call it. I'm a Conservative, I'm a woman, and my father is actually Welsh, but I have an English accent, and I'm a Welsh MP. My father is from Monmouth, and my grandfather was a miner. So I think it's this unholy trinity of abuse where people are trying to dehumanise me on a regular basis. But I'm not a victim. When someone they sent me a letter saying they wanted to hang me just before Christmas. I put that out on social media. I'm absolutely determined to do the job that the island democratically elected me to do, and that means bringing new nuclear to Wilver and also fighting to get a free port. The island is in desperate need of new jobs and investment, and that's what I'm trying to do on a daily basis.
Well, Virginia, thank you so much for making the time for us this morning, and do indeed stay safe doing your job. We really appreciate your words and your thoughts this morning here on The Briefing. Thank you. Well, let's speak now to James Sunderland, another MP, the Conservative MP for Bracknell, who shares these concerns as well. James, I understand that you are not yet wearing a stab vest, but you have some very grave concerns around the safety of your colleagues and yourself. What's the solution to all of this?
Well, Tom's very fair point. So Virginia, I know very well. If she feels and others feel that a stab vest is the way forward, then I fully support that. I mean, I'm not currently going down that road, but we are taking reasonable precautions as befits the job that we do. The solution is complex, it's multi-layered, but at the top of it, and the most important thing, is to sort the governance out in Westminster. If you get the governance right, everything else clicks into place. And what I mean by that is we need something akin to a parliamentary security committee on which all stakeholders sit. All of those who are entrusted or empowered to deliver an aspect of MP security need to be on that committee, reporting to a senior parliamentarian, possibly the Home Secretary, possibly the Security Minister, but somebody who is empowered to lead and to provide the resources that we need. And beyond that, beyond the governance, there's a whole range of physical and practical measures that we need to allow MPs to become part of the solution for their own safety.
Do you think it's an issue at the moment that it seems like there are about 650 different solutions, MPs sort of going down their own roads without this sort of unified approach to this issue?
No, it's a very fair point. I mean, I think the best people to decide what they need could well be MPs. I mean, Virginia knows Innismon very well. She's an excellent MP. Mike Freer in North London is the same, equally qualified to determine what he wants to use and have with him in terms of security. But I think there needs to be much more in terms of briefings for MPs. We need to be aware of the threats. We need much more in terms of counter-surveillance techniques. We need to understand if we are at threat in some way. We need to be brought into the picture an awful lot more. The idea that politicians do security, the idea that the Speaker is the risk owner for security off the estate is complete nonsense. We need to leave this to the operators. We need the operators to run our security for us, but by the same token, bring us in and make sure we're part of the solution.
It is interesting how many of these people who have made threats against MPs in the past have been on the radar of security services, yet perhaps not moved up in terms of priority lists or indeed communicated far enough. But James Sunderland, while I have you here today, the Prime Minister is making his first big speech of his premiership later on this morning. And I just wonder, finally, in this conversation, if you have any thoughts on this big idea of teaching maths until the age of 18. Is this the sort of solution that the country needs to its multifaceted problems?
Well, Tom, you've bounced me with a question that I'm not prepared for. I simply don't know is the honest answer. But what I would say is that the Prime Minister's had a fantastic start. He's calm, he's cautious, he's competent. He's instilling real confidence in his party at the moment. And I think we need to listen to what he has to say today. And if indeed there are plans to change education or to enhance education, and let's face it, our schools are pretty good in the UK now. They're pretty good. I think we should support him. But let's listen to what he has to say and let's make a judgment in due course.
Well, James Sunderland, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing. Really appreciate your thoughts and indeed appreciate you being sporting with that last question there. Well, let's continue now, because the Prime Minister, of course, will today vow to make it his personal mission to ensure that every student in England will study some form of maths until at least the age of 18. The pledge forms part of this major speech in which the Prime Minister will lay out his vision for the country. Labour says it would be an empty pledge if the government can't recruit more maths teachers. The announcement is seen by critics as an attempt by the Prime Minister to draw attention away from some of these crises we're seeing in the NHS or indeed the ongoing rail strikes that enter their second day today. Well, I'm joined now by David Maddox, the political editor of The Express Online. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, David. Oh, I believe we're having a little bit of connection trouble there. We'll see if we can pursue with that. But our political reporter, Olivia Utley, is with me in the studio. Let's start with you instead. The Prime Minister today, it seems an interesting top line of this speech to be briefed out. It seems very odd that amidst all of the crises we're seeing, the Prime Minister's talking about maths.
Yeah, so in some ways it's not really unexpected because it feels as though Rishi Sunak needs to sort of seize control of the narrative. So far, his premiership has been entirely dominated by firefighting crises, which have sort of landed on his plate. And what he wants to do in the run-up to the next election, and we can very much see the speech as a sort of setting out his pitch for the election, is set his own stall, put his own stamp on his premiership. And he feels very strongly about maths. He makes the point that, or he will make the point, that lots of jobs in the future are going to be far more analytical based on statistics, and we need our children to have a thorough grasp of maths. On the other hand, of course, it isn't the most pressing issue facing the country or facing the government as we enter the new year. We know that the migrant crisis is rumbling on. Rishi Sunak has staked his premiership on being able to solve it. The NHS is in a complete mess. Of course, we've got the strikes, which have crippled the country over the last few months, and again, it could end up being a year-long crisis. So it does feel a little bit off-piste. But essentially, yes, it's Rishi Sunak's attempt to sort of seize control of the narrative and show that he's not just a managing decline Prime Minister. He's a Prime Minister who has a vision for the country.
Well, let's bring in David Maddox now, who I believe we have established connection to. There he is. David, what do you make of this as a top line from the Prime Minister this morning?
When I saw it trailed yesterday evening. And you can't help but feel that, there are bigger issues in this country to deal with and, force kids who don't want to do maths for an extra 2 years. I mean, I see the point about the skills being important and necessary, but it's, this is a guy whose country is, on its knees with strikes. The NHS is in appalling crisis at the moment. The economy's flailing all over the place. And I'm not really sure that it's a message everybody wants to hear at the moment.
And it's interesting, sort of looking at what is going on elsewhere in the country. I'd be very surprised if a single question from a journalist in the audience of the speech today will be asking anything about this maths pledge. They'll all be asking about the NHS. They'll be asking about the strikes. They'll be asking about inflation, about the state of the economy. This seems like if it is indeed something intending to change the conversation, it doesn't seem like a particularly seismic pledge.
No, it's not, and it's actually not a new idea either. This idea of teaching maths to 18 has been knocking around for a few years, and the reason it never happens is because of cost and willingness not to do it, and because there are greater priorities, frankly. And yes, I'd be astonished if any of my colleagues, unless they've been particularly kind of generous, actually ask about the policy. You know, I think the number one question, I suspect, will be his claim that the NHS is not in crisis, when very clearly it is.
Yes, I think many people would see that, although the government seems to try and avoid using the word crisis whenever possible. It's always very funny to listen to government ministers at the dispatch box when they try and say the words cost of living and stop themselves before saying crisis. They say words like situation, just to avoid those headlines. Olivia Utley is still with me in the studio because the Labour Party has been saying that they don't necessarily oppose this idea, but that the government has been struggling recruiting maths teachers for a while now, that there isn't the resourcing to do this.
Yeah, so Labour's honed in on the sort of practicality of the idea. We do know that there is a crisis in teacher recruitment generally, but in maths teaching in particular, and already teachers, people who say that they'll train to do maths are given grants to help them do that. We know that there are plenty of schools in the country, up to half of schools, who don't have specialist maths teachers at secondary level. So there are definitely issues with the practicalities of this plan. Also, of course, only about half of students take A-levels. There are those who take BTECs, and then there are those who go into apprenticeships. So how some form of maths teaching is going to be wound into that isn't quite clear, but perhaps Rishi Sunak will reveal all this afternoon.
Well, just finally, David Maddox, we've been talking about maths for this conversation, but could it be the case that this may be a bit of a red herring, that there may be something else in this big speech, the first big speech that the Prime Minister is giving in his role? Could it be that there are other things that he's going to say that we may be surprised by?
I think it's very possible, actually. When I saw the trail last night, it did have a feeling of a pre-conference speech where you get the small announcement first and then suddenly the big announcement wows everybody in the speech. And to be honest, I hope for Rishi's sake that is the case, because I think he needs something big to really break the ice and to break the sort of downward momentum of his party as well at the moment, which is, not entirely his fault. I mean, but he needs something big, and I'm not sure teaching kids maths to 18 is going to cut the mustard.
Well, David Maddox, thank you so much for your thoughts this morning. Really appreciate you joining us here on The Briefing. Now, continuing with this theme of the other big issues that perhaps the Prime Minister is not paying too much attention to in his big speech today, crime in the capital is at the top of the agenda, because between June and September last year, the Met Police recorded, get this, 4,292 knife crimes throughout the city, with 1,236 of them resulting in injury or death. And during the New Year's fireworks, thousands without tickets stormed the security barrier, echoing the tragedy of the Brixton O2 event, which left 2 dead in late September. And a woman was found stabbed to death in her West London home, as an investigation has been launched after human remains were found in an East London pond. And in Croydon, a man in his 20s is fighting for his life after a stabbing. That's just a flavour of what's been going on in the last few weeks. So what on earth is going on in the capital, and what can be done to bring law and order back to London? Well, I'm joined now by the Deputy Chair of the London Assembly, Andrew Boff, a Conservative Assembly member. What is going on in London in particular?
Well, we've got a mayor who's largely asleep on the job. Remember that Sadiq Khan is the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, and under his watch, we've seen increase in violence against the person by about 11%. We've seen an increase in sexual violence, and we've seen an increase in muggings as well since he came to office in 2017. It's like he's been asleep on the job, that he hasn't paid attention to policing. And he's found it very difficult to motivate the police, largely because he implies that every police officer is racist or misogynist. And what he should be doing is actually supporting the police and improving the respect that Londoners have for those authorities.
Now, whenever we talk to London Labour politicians, they blame the Conservative National Government. Whenever we talk to London Conservative politicians, they blame the Labour mayor. Yeah. How do we know who to trust here?
Well, you just have to look at history. If you look at the maximum number of police officers we had was under the previous mayor's term in office, and that has declined since the number of police officers declined since Sadiq Khan has been in office.
How is that the case? Because there's been this recruitment drive for 20,000 extra police, but...
Absolutely, and yet with the government has allocated the funds for an extra 4,500 police officers in London, but the mayor just doesn't seem to be able to turn the money that he's getting from the government, which is considerable, into actual action. Basically, this administration of his is incompetent and largely asleep.
And yet, this is a mayor who's been re-elected by the people of London by a considerable margin at the last election. Is there just not enough public understanding of what the role of the mayor is, what the powers of the mayor are?
Well, I think that Londoners need an alternative. They need somebody that they can vote for that is actually going to make things happen rather than just issue press releases. I think Londoners are now tired of Sadiq Khan. Even Labour politicians, when you take them to one side in quiet, you'll never get this on the record, will say how dissatisfied they are with the record of Sadiq Khan. So we need an alternative, and we're going to get that alternative. We'll have that chance in next year. To be able to replace the mayor, and it's inevitable he will be replaced. You cannot continue with a mayor like Sadiq Khan, who fails on almost every single metric, and still runs for re-election.
Now, you scrutinise him as a job. You sit, of course, on the London Assembly. Is it your indication that this is a mayor who's going to try and run for a third term?
He will run for a third term. I'm fairly convinced of that, unless he gets a better job somewhere else. And there is no better job than the Mayor of London. But yes, he certainly will run, and I believe he will fail.
It's interesting that this election is coming around so soon, next year, in fact. What's your indication in terms of who the Conservative candidate might be this time round?
Well, we're starting the process fairly soon. I mean, I want it to be me, but it could very well be somebody else. But it's got to be somebody that can speak for London, a London voice addressing London issues. Sometimes our campaigns in the past have had the National Conservative stamp on them, but they haven't really appealed to Londoners themselves. Londoners have a different view of the world. There are certain things that matter to Londoners more than that matters to the rest of the country, and we need a candidate who can articulate that.
Well, is this an exclusive here on GB News, Andrew Boff? Are you throwing your hat into the ring to stand for that position here and now? Most definitely. Well, thank you very much for being so candid with us this morning on GB News. Really appreciate your thoughts on crime and, indeed, on the politics of London. That's all we have time for today on The Briefing. Thank you so much for tuning in and, indeed, catching up. Coming up, it's Bev Turner today. But before that, a short break.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a